Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Melissa Yee. She is a doctor of acupuncture and Oriental medicine in private practice. She is the coordinator of the grassroots organization known as Seeds of Truth, which has a Facebook page where people can learn about GMO labeling, the current activities both nationally and internationally. She has organized panels across Oahu. One just went live on Olelo 2 days ago in Kapolei. And Seeds of Truth has been basically the only organization that I know of that has consistently been bringing this issue in front of us. It's been the only organization I know that has been giving us the other side of the story. And her tireless efforts and her professionalism, her passion, I'm so happy she's here. And she cares enough to take time to come and speak to us all the way out again in Laina. Because she is an expert in this subject. Dr. Yee has also been involved in stopping fluoridation in our water supply. Thank you so much. Because every legislative session, they try to reintroduce poisoning our water with fluoride. She's also exposed the harm that poor diets, the amalgam fillings that you have, the silver fillings that you have in your mouth, how root canals are very dangerous, as well as heavy metal toxicities. She has basically been the David fighting the Goliath. And when she asked if I would like to help organize this panel, I was like, yes, thank you so much. Yes, would you come? Would you bring Howard? Would you bring anybody and everybody that she knows? I'm so glad you are here. Dr. Yee, would you like to come up?
Good evening, everybody. How are you? I'd just like a show of hands. How many people are from Honolulu who are here tonight? Honolulu? You came all the way? Okay. And anybody from the biotech companies here? That's what I thought. I saw a couple other people out here. You're also an employee. Anybody else? And how about other people, local area, Nanakuli, Waianae? Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're here tonight. And we're going to reach out to a lot more people tonight and in the coming days and weeks when we show this again on Olelo. And I think we're really fortunate that we have Olelo Community TV because a lot of people want to know these issues, but they're not able to get around. Gas prices have gone up, people are coming back from work, and they don't have the time to come to these kind of gatherings. But fortunately, because of Olelo, we're able to watch from home and learn more about these issues and become more engaged that way. My name is Dr. Melissa Yee, and I've been doing this work only for about 4 years. As Ken mentioned, I was involved in stopping, or I was part of a group that was stopping fluoride here in Hawaii. It was an issue that came up in the 1970s. And when I returned to Hawaii from Europe, and I lived in Italy and have a great affinity for Italy, I was very inspired to do something politically, and I really felt that it was important to get involved in this issue about fluoride. So we were very, very fortunate that there was a growing momentum to stop putting chemicals in the water. And because so much research was coming out, evidence that showed that fluoridation and fluoride did not help reduce tooth decay. When we finally got the bill passed in the City Council in 2003, It was an agreement among everybody involved, including the dentists, that people had a right to know, they had a right to choose, and we didn't want to put chemicals in our water supply. So that was the consensus. And when the Dental Association found out that we had passed this bill, they were incensed, because we had put it past them and they didn't know about it. But it was like Gigi was saying, you know, we did it very quietly. Unfortunately, with the issue of GMO, we're having to be a little bit more noisy, because the corporations have so many millions of dollars, and that's probably why you're here today, to report back to your company a new strategy. But I also want you to be here because you need to learn for yourself the other side of the story. Because in fact, we cannot coexist. Something's got to give. You can't say just put a little fluoride in the water and you're going to save the people. You're going to poison some people and they won't be the better for it. So that's what we're learning about this GMO issue today. That a little bit of poison has gone too far. This has been going on for more than 100 years. And that's what my PowerPoint today is going to be about, that we have to change our ways. We have to stop using these poisons. There's no other solution. Like Gigi said, we have to do it in a very constructive and productive way. We have to start restoring the soil and creating a place where we can live and grow our own food and don't be dependent on importing processed foods from the mainland when oil prices are going up, and there's a very big risk that someday where there's going to be a shipping strike or somehow food will not be able to come to us from these other places, and we will have to be self-sustainable. So that time is coming very soon, and if we don't do something now, then perhaps we are doomed, and that's very discouraging. But I have to say that there's hope, because people are getting mobilized, people power is out there, and I'm seeing people's attitudes changing about this issue. So I believe very strongly, just as we were very successful with the fluoridation issue, Hawaii will be the first place to kick the biotech companies out of Hawaii and have a new way of growing food and interacting with each other in a much more harmonious and healthy way. So let's look forward to that happening in our lifetime, and let's start this PowerPoint. Okay, so maybe you can just go back to the very beginning, and I'll tell you next when we change. Okay, so the panel is about poisoning the Aina. There's no way around it. You can't call it by any nicer name. The Aina has been poisoned. And there are long-term consequences of GMOs, pesticides, and bee colony collapse disorder. And I tried to separate these out, but in fact, they're all interacting and they're all affecting each other. And so that's why the subtitle here is How 100 Years of Chemical Spraying and 20 Years of GMO Experimentation Have Led to Bee Colony Collapse and General Environmental Deterioration of the Hawaiian Islands. Next. So I'm sure many of you just saw the Time magazine last week that said that we're in a bad situation with the bees. I believe Monsanto had a conference in March, and they made a big to-do about it, and I think a lot of the media is capitalizing on this issue right now, but it is a very big concern. The bees are dying, and we are dying as well. So a world without bees would not be a whole world. It would be very impoverished, and it would be very sad. Next. I'd just like to go briefly back to the history of Hawaii. I'm Chinese. My parents my father came from Guangzhou as a teenager, moved to Boston, met my mother here in Hawaii, and started a family here. But my mother's side goes back several generations to a time from the south of China, Guangzhou, where these grandparents, great-grandparents came over on the ships and came here to work in the sugar cane plantations. So here on the right side, you can see women who were living in Puna, Chinese women who came here to support their husbands as well as work in the cane fields. And on the left side, you see a wonderful Hawaiian man playing a ukulele. When you look at the history books about sugarcane and pineapple in Hawaii, you know that the Hawaiians were not brought in to work in the plantations. They were allowed to continue their lifestyle. And the people who were the Lunas were actually American-speaking, English-speaking, and Portuguese, because they were found to be good delegators of responsibility and were able to manage these people who were just beginning to learn English. So these are my ancestors, and in fact, Aoyang Homestead Road in Nanakuli, these are my ancestors, Aoyangs. And so we've been here for many generations, and we feel very much a part of this place. And we all do. That's why we want to preserve it for future generations. Yes. So when these people came over in the 1800s, we know very well about the illegal takeover of these islands in 1898. And then the Big Five established themselves. It was various corporations who were related to the missionary families, and they took over, and we're still dealing with that issue, that there has been an annexation of these islands and the Hawaiian people would like to have it back. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the Big Five of today. So the new Big Five are the chemical companies. They have taken over. And this is very tragic for Hawaii because we are now very much at the mercy of the rules that they're setting down for our politicians, the way the lobbyists are controlling what's happening down in the legislature, the city councils, and the county councils. And they have enormous money available to them to influence people through newspaper ads that cost thousands and thousands of dollars that none of us can afford to counter. So we have to do it by having gatherings like this where the people can come and hear the information, and they can watch on community TV what the other side is talking about. So these Big Five companies, as you're probably learning, are Monsanto, DuPont. Here in Hawaii, they're called Pioneer Hybrid. Syngenta, Bayer Crop Science, and Bayer is very closely associated with Bayer Pharmaceuticals, and I'm sure many of you are taking aspirin for your blood pressure. And this is the same company that was working back in the Second World War together with the Nazis. So they're still alive and well, and now they're here in Hawaii, and they are doing their GMO experimentation. And lastly, we have BASF, and we have Dow Chemical Company. Next. So what's ahead in my talk? I'm going to go over pesticides, GMOs, bees, and touch on bee colony collapse disorder, and then lastly, what we can do. I'm certainly not an expert in this area of any of these things. I'm not a scientist. My background is Oriental medicine, and I have a great concern because every day I see patients who have problems with their digestive system. They're taking many, many medications, and they're not getting better. In fact, this morning I had a lady who came in, and she has problems with diarrhea, uncontrollable diarrhea. And I would like to ask her, you know, are you eating rainbow papaya? This is something that comes up very quickly in my discussion with them about their diet. And when I find out they're eating rainbow papaya, I tell them immediately, stop eating it. There's no way around it, and you will get better, and they do get better. Okay, let's move on to pesticides, first of all. So when we have people who are suffering from various diseases, which may have been caused by various types of petrochemicals, we send them to the doctor, and what do they get? More petrochemicals, pharmaceutical drugs, which do not necessarily help them. If they've gotten cancer, a diagnosis of cancer, then they're going to take radiation, they're going to take chemotherapy, which again are more petrochemicals which poison them further. If they've got a strong immune system, they will be able to survive and live longer to help the future generations create a place where we can live, but many of them unfortunately become part of the statistics where the chemotherapy and the drugs fail. So here on the left side you have a partial list of pesticides used by the GM seed companies in Hawaii, and there's so many of them, you know, and these are all names that sound like war. And this particular list was compiled by Dr. Hector Valenzuela and is being used in a lawsuit against Pioneer Hybrid because the Waimea people are suffering from enormous pollution from chemical drift as well as drift from the dust that is flying around and making the people and the children of this area very, very sick. And on the right, you know very well this product. I'm sure many of you are still using it in your backyards, and it's time to stop. Roundup is so cheap that you can find it anywhere. You can find it in Lowe's, you can find it in any kind of a garden shop, and it's so easy because you just spray it and it kills your weeds pretty much within 1 or 2 days. Sometimes when you're traveling down the highway, you'll see areas of brown vegetation that has died. I used to live near Manoa Stream, and we would come home in the afternoon and we could smell the chemical in the air. And we could see within 2 days that all the weeds along the stream were dead, and we knew that the city and county had been there spraying again. So Roundup is used very extensively, and this is unfortunate because this is contributing to the poisoning of our Aina. So Monsanto, everybody knows Monsanto now because we've had many, many rallies where people were able to express their frustration. And Monsanto is the company that brought you Agent Orange. Who doesn't know somebody who has suffered from Agent Orange poisoning when they were working out in those fields as soldiers in the Vietnam War? DDT, remember the kids that were running behind the mosquito trucks? I'm sure many of you were doing the same thing. All that spray, we thought, oh wow, this is so cool, let's go follow the trucks. We didn't realize they were spraying DDT, and later many of us became sick, got cancer, died, and didn't know how toxic this particular chemical was. Monsanto's also brought us dioxin, which is now banned, PCBs, aspartame. How many of you drink diet sodas? I don't think you better do that anymore, because aspartame is actually made from GMO E. coli bacteria. And this is stated very clearly in the patent for aspartame production, that they are using E. coli bacteria, which is also GMO. So if you want to slow death, if you have diabetes, you better stop drinking that diet soda right away, or it'll be a very painful death. And then we also have bovine growth hormone, otherwise known as Posilac, and this is something that has been put in the milk to allow the cows that are lactating to give more milk. Unfortunately, the cows develop infection on their nipples, and this poison or this pus comes into the milk that you've been drinking, and that's why there's been a big brouhaha about labeling milk that contains bovine growth hormone or not containing bovine growth hormone. Unfortunately, the farmers won that lawsuit, and they can now declare that they are growing or they have milk that is not containing bovine growth hormone. And that is something you also have to be aware of. So I really do my best to buy organic milk. And lastly, our wonderful glyphosate, some people call it, also known as Roundup. We just had a guest speaker, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who came to speak 2 times here in Honolulu. And she's a brilliant scientist who has the courage to speak out and say Roundup is actually causing autism. And you can go to our Facebook page and you can see her presentation at the Church of the Crossroads. And she doesn't mince words. She says there's such a strong correlation that if you don't look at this seriously, we're really in bad shape for the future of Hawaii and our kids. Next. Okay. I think if you look at these pictures, we don't want to turn off the lights necessarily, but this is what's happening in Vietnam as a result of our presence there during the Vietnam War. These are photos from a photo exhibit that's just opened recently in New York. Kevin Driscoll has put together these horrible, horrible, and very touching photographs of young kids and older kids who have been poisoned by Agent Orange. And they're living in orphanages, and their parents are either abandoning them or taking care of them. And this is very, very sad because the Vietnamese people are such good people. They open their country to us, and this is the tragic after consequence of what we did there 60 years ago. Next. So there's also been a lot in the news about the 270,000 Indian farmers who have committed suicide. These are people who have signed the contract with Monsanto to buy their seeds, to buy their chemicals. They've taken out loans. They found that the yields were not forthcoming, and they were so devastated that they knew they could never grow those crops and make a profit from it as they were promised. And so they actually drank the chemicals that they were using on their plants and committed suicide in that way. Actually, 270,000 people have died because of these chemicals. This is so sad. And so someone asked Fred Perlak from Monsanto, "Is this true that this has happened?" And he said, "Not true." I leave it to you to decide what you think. I've included here a quote from journalist P. Sainath, who's going to be coming to Hawaii in September, and he's going to be speaking up at the University of Hawaii about his experience as a journalist. And he knows very well what's happening with the farmers who have committed suicide, and he'll probably be talking about that in some of the panels that he'll be on. But he's written an article that's called, "It's the Soil, Stupid." Because bottom line is, when you use so many chemicals, you're poisoning the land, and you're poisoning the people who are spraying it on the land, and now the soil can no longer sustain the people. So until we regenerate the soil, we will see a downward decline in the vitality of the people who are eating the foods that are grown on this soil, as well as the soil itself. Dr. Stephanie Seneff, together with Anthony Samsel, wrote this paper, which was published in Entropy, talking about the connection of Roundup to autism and other systemic diseases. You can go online and read it. She made it very clear that it was hard to find a journal that was not pro-industry that would publish it, because so many of the articles that are being printed today are really only speaking favorably about what the industry is doing and not being independent and saying, no, there's another side to what's happening with these poisons, these chemicals, and they're taking a toll on our health and our environment. So another person who has come under fire is Gilles-Éric Seralini, who in September 2012 released a paper showing that for 2 years he had been monitoring laboratory rats and feeding them Roundup herbicide and Roundup tolerant genetically modified corn. And you can see here, this is one example of a rat that developed very huge tumors on its body. And immediately, the media, the scientists jumped in and said, no, the evidence was faulty, he's biased in favor of anti-GMO, and he has no credibility. This is what happens with scientists who dare to speak out. So it's a matter of character assassination. Even my speaking out puts me at risk that the biotech companies will go after me for being so outspoken. But somebody has to speak the truth, and that's why we stand for what we do. That's why we call ourselves Seeds of Truth. So over time, there have been many scientists who have come out, such as Arpad Putzai, who researched the GE potato. He was thoroughly convinced that genetic engineering worked. But when he conducted the study, he realized that this was so poisonous that he declared that he would never eat a GE potato. And he was immediately fired from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, where he was working. He was smeared in the media, and it took years to restore his credibility and his reputation and his job at the university. But he suffered because of it, because he was truthful. Likewise, Ignacio Chapela and David Quist published an article in Nature in 2001 talking about the contamination of indigenous corn in Mexico, how it had been polluted, contaminated by GE, genetically engineered corn, inadvertently. This was not something that was intended, but because of drift, the indigenous corn then became contaminated with the GE corn. And locally, we have Dr. Lauren Pang, who was in the video you just saw, Islands at Risk, and that video came out in 2006. And you can see that if you know these people, that they've all turned white-haired, me included. because we're so focused on bringing this information out. But it's taking a long, long time to do something about it. And he has always spoken about the precautionary principle because he is a medical doctor. He's done research on vaccines and drugs and found that unless you're cautious, unless you're tracking what each drug, where each drug is being distributed, you have no way that if there's an adverse reaction of finding out where that batch went and recalling it. This is very logical. It's commonsensical. This is what happens in the drug industry. But unfortunately, we're not applying that to the GMO industry. And likewise, Dr. Hector Valenzuela, he has been working at the University of Hawaii for almost 20 years, and from the very beginning said, show us the safety of GMO, especially the papaya. And he's still very concerned. Why are you not giving us all the evidence? Why don't you tell us the truth? And he was persecuted, he was harassed. Fortunately, he got his tenure. But even today, he stands alone in that Department of Tropical Agriculture. Nobody wants to talk to him because he's really considered an outcast by his colleagues. But it's, again, because he stood for the truth, that we, the people, really know who he is, and we honor him because of his strength and his courage. So there's a lot to be asked about the rainbow papaya. I personally don't eat it, and I discourage people from eating it, and I stand on that, but let's move on. So what are the long-term consequences of pesticides? Chemicals are chemicals, poison is poison. You can never dilute it to a point where it is no longer harmful. So with the pesticide usage over the last 100 years, and very specifically in the last 20 years with the development of GMO crops, we're seeing further depletion of the soil nutrients, loss of bacteria, environmental pollution, runoff into the oceans, into the air, into the soil, into the communities surrounding these GMO fields and where pesticides are being applied, loss of biodiversity, residue of pesticide in the food that we're eating, which looks so nice and clean and beautiful, but in fact it contains many, many chemicals. There's residue in the bloodstream, leading to systemic problems and weakened immune system. And lastly, long-term, is the increased medical cost. So Obamacare is about a few months away. And do you think that's really going to help us? We could do it so cheaply by giving people good food to eat, clean water, positive attitude, and really doing it in a very natural way. We don't need to give people more chemicals.